I've never been willing to give this talk because it's personal. It's about my life, but it was pointed out that I am the authority on my life. And I divide my life into two parts: pre-accident and post-traumatic gifted. I was a very ordinary, in fact, even one could say mediocre, 16-year-old boy growing up in suburban Salt Lake City, Utah, the oldest of four. My parents owned a small candy manufacturing business. I was at best a C student. That's actually being a bit generous. But it was a time in which the country was fascinated with the space race and rocketry. The Soviets were far ahead of us with Sputnik, with the first man in space, with much larger and more capable rockets. And nearly every 16 or 17-year-old boy wanted to be an astronaut. I was building a rocket one May day in 1962, just about a year after young President Kennedy made the declaration, "We will put a man on the moon and bring him back alive in this decade." Now, as you already know, I'm no rocket scientist. The rocket that I was building exploded while I was holding it. Boom. The blast blew off half of my fingers, took the sight in one eye. My story likely would have ended there, except our next door neighbor's electric dryer was broken, and Ruth Johnson was out hanging out her wash the old-fashioned way. Ruth was also an Army surgical nurse. The blast summoned her and her laundry. Her sheets became my bandages and tourniquets, and it was Ruth who kept me from bleeding to death that day. 7 weeks and 25 surgeries later, I left the hospital, came home and recuperated the rest of the summer. That fall, I started my senior year at Olympus High. But within a month, I lost the sight in my remaining eye. Then began 6 months of obviously failed eye surgeries. Waiting, not knowing, uncertainty. Finally, after the 5th failed surgery, the doctors came to my hospital room and said to me and my mother, "We have done all that we can for you. You will be blind for the rest of your life." Mother burst into tears, quite understandably. For me, the waiting, the not knowing, the anxiety, the uncertainty was so painful that the bad news came as a great relief. I could finally begin the challenge that the rest of my life had suddenly become. And that day, that very day, in that hospital bed, I made some declarations. I declared that I would not be dependent, that I would not be poor, that I would not live at home, that I would live in the sighted world doing sighted things. Now I want to say that, I want to pause here a moment. Declarations are one of the more powerful things that I've learned in all of my years since then. Declarations precede leaps. They precipitate action. They're a powerful organizing principle. Think about Kennedy's declaration, "A man on the moon." or the Declaration of Independence that opened the possibility for an entire different form of government on this earth. One of the actions that those declarations produced, again that very same day, was I applied to Guide Dogs for the Blind, a school in California. And a short time after that, I graduated from there with the first of 8 guide dogs, a German Shepherd named Minka. That fall, I started the University of Utah. 4 years later, I graduated first in my class. Now, 4 years, that's how short it used to take. I see some of you have parents. Some of you have children. Yeah, first in my class. I needed more education and more skills. I wanted the new hot degree, which was a Master in Business Administration, and I applied to Harvard and Stanford, both of whom said no. No one who was blind could manage a program as difficult as ours. I don't know how they knew that, because they had never admitted anyone who was blind. This was one of their boundaries, not based on clear thinking, but based on faulty assumptions. I went back and met with the Dean of Admissions at the Wharton School in Philadelphia, told him about Harvard and Stanford, and he said, I don't know if you can handle this program or not, but you're admitted. We'll find out when you get here. If you can't, you'll leave. Do we have the slide for the boats? One of the things I learned on this long journey from scarcity to abundance was an insight I had when I was visiting a yacht basin. And I saw all these beautiful boats, very expensive, very empty. And I realized there's no shortage of money, just a shortage of the skill for knowing how to make money. And I determined I was going to acquire that skill. So I finished Wharton in 2 years, this time 5th in my class. Mother wanted to know who were the other 4. Some people are hard to satisfy. And I started to think that Stanford may be right. I had 50 interviews and no offers. Finally, a tiny firm in Philadelphia named Cook & Beeler, a money management firm, interviewed me to become a security analyst. And I talked to them about why I thought I would be a good security analyst. And I said, I think it'd be important to be able to distinguish assessments from assertions, facts from opinions, to have insights, and most of all, to have metrics. Because if you can't measure something, you can't manage it. They made me an offer, and it was such a great offer, I accepted it at once. It was also my only offer. I actually had a PhD offer from Stanford in applied mathematics, but I liked the math of adding up the numbers more at Cook & Beeler. Their offer was, we will pay you the normal MBA salary. At that time, that was $15,000 a year, not a month. And you pay your sighted assistant. It was a terrific offer. It gave me an opportunity without burdening their income statement. 6 of us who were partners grew the firm from tiny into the billions. And because we had a good investment process and clear metrics, we were able to sell for a very friendly price. And I was one of the partners who wanted to go off and pursue other interests. One of the things I wanted to do was try and take the dis out of disability. Senator Bob Dole appointed me to be one of the 8 commissioners on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, a Washington policy position, but fortunately only part-time. I went there thinking I could change the policies that make life difficult for our poor and disabled. I was so wrong. In fact, the legislation was expanded to cover even more people and imposing even higher costs on those employers who do dare hire the disabled. This is one of the reasons why the unemployment rate for the seriously disabled is now higher than it was before the law was passed. You're also very reluctant to hire someone if it's very difficult to fire them. I discovered the incredible importance of policy. Policy matters, incentives matter, offers are far more valuable than requests, but I could not change policy from inside. I resigned. And what I wanted to do next was something at which I could win. And I had a great opportunity that came to me. Steve Maxwell had been my fitness trainer for over a decade. He's a Jujitsu fighter. And I finally agreed to just try Jujitsu once. It turns out he was right. I did love it, and still do. It's like 3-dimensional chess, but physical. It favors the strategically inclined over the merely strong or large. It's like judo, but rougher. You start standing up like judo, but the first point is to take your opponent to the mat with a throw or a takedown. Then the fight continues often on the mat, especially the way I have adapted. What I discovered was being blind was not the big problem, as long as I didn't let go of my opponent. The big problem was not being able to make grips. With Jiu-Jitsu, you fight with your hands, your arms, your legs, and your feet. You fight for joint locks and chokeholds so that your opponent either submits or becomes unconscious. I've modified my game. I fight much more with my legs and feet than with my hands. And I started winning small competitions, then the national. Then with the encouragement of my wife, who is also a jiu-jitsu fighter, in 2003 we went to Brazil for the international competition for master seniors, and I won a gold medal. Now, many people thought that was an accident or a fluke or just luck, and since I was one of those many people, we went back in 04 and 05, and I got 2 more gold medals. Then I retired. It only could be downhill from here. I don't compete anymore, but I train twice a week. And I still love it. I teach once in a while, but not often. What I learned from Jiu-Jitsu applies to all other parts of my life, and to yours too. It's about the importance of living with the conviction that opportunities will appear, that your opponents or your life will give you opportunity. That what you need to do is prepare, practice, and practice. Opportunities favor those who are prepared in mind and body. And courage. The courage to act, the courage to get on the mat, the courage to be larger than your fears. the courage to be larger than your circumstances, the courage to ignore those boundaries imposed on you by others or by yourself, because you can make those boundaries come true if you believe in them. What I learned from Jiu-Jitsu: declare, learn, act, measure for value. And the learn, it takes 10,000 hours to get good at anything. That's just to get good. To be superb takes a long time. We have a small money management firm called Kairos Capital Advisors. Kairos is a Greek word that means moment of opportunity for action. I believe that opportunities aren't things out there waiting for you, that you can actually create your Kairos moment if you're prepared and if you have the courage to act. In preparing this talk, a friend of mine, Dr. Matthew Budd, who's a psychiatrist, said, those declarations that you made as a teenage boy are not the ones that automatically come to mind when you're newly blind. How did you happen to think of that? Thank you. And the answer is my father. When I was newly blind, he started reading to me a lot. Inspirational stories and poems. And one poem that has come back to me again and again over all these years, especially in moments of despair or depression, of which there have been many, subsequently made famous by Nelson Mandela. It's Invictus, the last stanza of which is, despite how straight the gate, how narrow the path, how charged with punishment the scroll, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Thank you.